Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. So, welcome to episode 126 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm host Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. In this episode, we are going to bring on Richard Jones. Richard works with us here at the shop. He helps teach at the shooting schools. We'll be taking more of that role on next year. Me and Richard go way back in our shooting careers and shooting history, and he's got a great long history, not just in shooting, but in his journey to get here and introduction to long range shooting. So, really looking forward to bringing him on the podcast and doing the interview. So without further ado, here we go. All right, before we get started, I would like to thank a couple of quick sponsors. I'd like to thank TriggerTech. TriggerTech is a maker of fine rifle triggers, and they make triggers for about everybody and everything in the firearms world. So if you want to upgrade your rifle and you need a better trigger and you need it now, stop over to TriggerTech.com. That's TriggerTech.com. I'd also like to thank Krieger Barrel. Krieger is another proud sponsor of the show. They make world-class, fine-cut rifled barrels. They're made right here in the United States and Wisconsin. Great company, family-owned. And they have a new program called Krieger Direct, where you can log on, purchase your barrel, and have it in as little as 2 to 3 business days. So if you need a barrel, and you need it now, stop over to KriegerDirect.com. That's KriegerDirect.com. All right, so I'd like to welcome Richard to the show. If you call in, you might actually get him on the phone talking a little bit about him. But Richard, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Jamie. Nice to be here this morning.
So put him on the spot yesterday and said, hey, by the way, we're going to bring you on to do an interview with the podcast tomorrow. And so we go way back. Richard's got a long history in shooting and just his journey here. Colin, you might actually get him on the phone and talk with him. He's a great guy to talk to as well. Teaches at the shooting school. So if you attended our shooting schools this year, you've probably seen him. So before we get started too much along the line, your journey to the United States and your actual background, because you're sort of retired from your line of work.
Yeah, that's right. So, it's a long time ago now. I've been living in the U.S. for 25 years now, which is a lifetime for a lot of the people that we work with at the shooting school, for instance. We see some youngsters there. So I've been here longer than they've been alive, which is makes me laugh. You know, we're all getting older, but it beats the alternative, right?
Oh, it does, for sure.
Yeah, so my background, I started out life, I grew up in the north of England, south of Newcastle in a town called Hartlepool. Super duper place to grow up. Went through school, had a good time. School, was big into athletics and long distance running and all those kind of things. And then when I was about 17, my father got a promotion in his work. He was a nuclear physicist. And so he got promoted to the head office, which was down the other end of the country in London. So I was given a choice. I could either stay up in the Northeast and go to college up there, or I could move down with him and my family down to the south of England. And so I chose to do that. And I've got 3 older sisters. They'd all left home by that time. So we moved down south, and I ended up in a place called Chelmsford in the UK, which is by train about 20 minutes from London. So my father would commute into London every day. And so sort of arrived in a new town with no friends and didn't have all this social media that everybody has today, you know, basically on my own. So I rolled my bicycle out of the garage and started cycling and got massively into cycling. And then went through a summer there and got towards the end of the summer. My parents were like, well, hey, you know, what are you going to do now? You started college up where you were living, and now you've been bumming around for a couple of months. What are you going to do? So I'm like, no idea. Clueless. So the piece of paper was pushed in front of me, and they said, well, why don't you apply for working at this local company and see where it goes? So I did that and got a job at Marconi Communication Systems, which, you know, if you're into radio stuff, you know who Marconi was. And so I worked at the New Street facility at Marconi's for 4 years, and they put me through college, and I went to college in town and ended up with a degree in radio systems engineering. And so I got to the end of that, and it was a bizarre sort of a time, right? We didn't get paid very well, and, you know, we lived in a really junky house, but it was a lot of fun. I got into rock climbing at that point, and I was big into rock climbing around the UK, which is a big sport in the UK. And we'd go to the Alps every year to go snow and ice climbing and do some rock climbing in the Alps. And it was just, a fantastic time, right? You're in the 20s. Nothing will stop you. Good time to be a youngster. So I got to the end of my college work, and I was just like, I looked around me, and I hate to say it, but there was just a bunch of curmudgeonly old men working there who were just unhappy. Right? They've been working there for 40 years or whatever, and they were just not happy people. So I'm like, you know what? I need to go do something else. So I found, again, in my local paper, a company in the north side of London that was looking for sales support engineers. So I rolled over there one day and obviously struck a chord, and they hired me like pretty much on the spot. So I worked as a inside sales support guy for about a year. And then they said, hey, there's this whole thing called Europe. Would you like to be the European sales guy? And I'm like, well, heck yeah. So I got a huge break there. And those guys were such a fantastic company to work for. So I got a big break there, and I started my, being business development. So my territory at that time, get this, was Russia, Northern Europe, and Middle East.
Oh, wow. That's a big stretch.
Yeah. So I mean, we had a very small amount of business when I rolled in there. Most of it was in the Netherlands and with the Dutch, which I love going to the Netherlands. It's such a great place. Dutch people are fantastic. Awesome place to visit. So we had a little bit of business going, and then by the end of the year, I'd won a huge contract in Denmark for a mobile operator, a bit like Verizon, but the Danish version. So that was going really, really well. And I carried on working with those guys for 6 years. And that included also a big contract that we did with Gazprom. So I was out in Russia when it was not really cool to be in Russia, but it was a lot of fun. And I got some great stories, but I share those face-to-face only because some of them are a bit, as we say in the UK, dodgy. So then I left that company and I went to work for another company in the electronics field, similar type of business, and really started doing more work in North America at that point. Never really, done any work in North America. Visited here twice to go skiing. Actually, that's a whole other story as well. Of course, this was. I went to Tahoe on a ski holiday with a girlfriend and never skied before. So I rocked up to Heavenly in Lake Tahoe with all my ski gear and stood there with the 6-year-olds and was taught how to ski. And it was I don't know whether it comes across on the podcast, but that's the kind of stuff I love to do, right? You're completely out of your, comfort zone. And it was just such a great time. So that was good. So then I started doing some business over here. And the next portion of this is going to roll into be careful what you ask for. You might just get it. Because I rolled into work one morning and happened to meet the managing director of the company. And he said, "Oh, how's it going?" And I went, "Oh, it's okay. But the time offset between here and the US it's killing me, And he goes, it comes with the territory, right? And I'm like, yeah, I know it, but it would be so much easier if I was living over there. So his next words out of his mouth were, well, why don't you work some numbers up on that and we'll see if we can do something about it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And literally within 2 or 3 months, I was living in New Jersey and living and working in New Jersey. And again, I picked myself up and I moved over to New Jersey. Really didn't know a soul. And that was 26 years ago, 25 and a half years ago. And so I landed in New Jersey. That company went through some ups and downs with their main markets were in Asia and they were suffering a little bit. So they really didn't give me any engineering support. So along the way at trade shows and what, I run into another company that was in New Jersey. And one day, their CEO's secretary calls me up and says, "Hey, would you come in for coffee on Saturday?" And I'm like, "Well, I've got a tea time at, noon." "Oh, don't worry. Come in at 9:30, 10 o'clock. So-and-so just wants to sit down and have a chat." So anyway, I rolled into there, wearing my best shorts and a t-shirt and flip-flops, and basically was offered a job on the spot. So I'm like, yeah, okay.
Oh, that's
so hilarious. I went to work for another larger company, still a medium-sized business, and I just left them a couple of years ago after 20-something years, 23 and a half years with them.
And where did you finish up in the business as far as what level were you at in the organization?
Yeah, so I was a VP. So I started out in sort of more of a business development kind of a world because that's what I was good at the time. But I was extremely fortunate in that there were always opportunities coming up within that organization. So I was able to jump around. So a lot of people spend a large portion of their career looking for the next job at the next company. And I was able to spend, I would say, a career with just 4 jobs. So in 35 years of work, I had 4 companies that I worked for, basically, and each one of them was fantastic. I really enjoyed working for each one of them along the way, which was amazing. But I was able to change jobs within those organizations, and that was what was key to keeping my interest. So every 2 or 3 years, they would give me hey, we want you to go do this. And it was, okay, first you've got to learn about it, then you've got to do it, and then you've got to learn how to do it better, and so on and so forth. So that was always, kept me engaged. So then that company then transacted from being a private company to a private equity-owned company. And that gave me an opportunity to change roles again and then leave working for working within the head office there in New Jersey. And my wife and I, along the way, I got married, by the way. So my wife and I were able to relocate into Pennsylvania. And so now we live in east side of Pittsburgh, if you like, and love it. New Jersey's special, but Pennsylvania is much nicer in a broader sense.
It is.
We enjoy living here, and we're closer to my wife's mom, who's getting up in age. So that's really the real motivator to move to Pennsylvania, was to be around to help her.
That is awesome. Now, we do have some business owners and a lot of business people that listen to the podcast. When you say medium-sized company, what size company were you working for?
So like a $200 million company.
And how many employees do you think?
Well, that's a good one, right? Because over that business period, there was a massive change in the amount of work that was done overseas, right? So within our business, we had to increase our output from our overseas facility. And in the time that I worked for them, they had already been working in China before I joined them. I think they entered China in 1994. And they are now in their 4th or 5th larger facility. So every time that they had to change for some reason, lease came up or whatever, they would go to the next increment in facility size. And so, we had, a fair amount of space in New Jersey, coming up 165,000 square feet. It was a pretty big manufacturing facility in New Jersey, but we also had about the same amount of space in China as well.
Wow. The one thing I think is pretty unique is in sales, or when you're dealing with people, working with people, it's interesting to train people or how to talk to people when they're how to deal with people, how to approach people, how to speak to people properly, and even here in the United States, sometimes that's a big challenge. But I'm thinking, okay, not only you overseas, but now you're overseas in all of these different countries whose backgrounds, whose ideas, beliefs, things you say, can't say, how you insult and uninsult people. That's got to be a whole nother challenge in sales when you start crossing borders.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the majority of the I guess you could argue the point that maybe I came to the US because it's easy, right? It's pretty much an English-speaking nation. Don't want to insult anybody out there, but it's pretty much an English-speaking nation. Even now, Jamie and I do talk about what kind of English we're using to communicate, because I'm always saying, well, that's how the British would say it. But Yeah. So, but when I was traveling overseas, and what are my observations? Well, fortunately, because of the type of business I was in, I'm mostly dealing with technical people. So in terms of having, deeper commercial discussions with people, never a problem. Literally never a problem. They were always, solid English speakers. And so it was very little stress on my side. Now, I can tell you some stories about traveling around various countries that are extremely comical. I had a flat tire once when I was driving across Sweden. And I wandered into a gas station, and I was trying to explain to this nice young lady that I needed the air hose to pump my tire up, and I used inappropriate hand actions to do that, which didn't really strike me as funny until a guy came out from behind in the office area, I guess, and he was laughing so hard he was crying, and he turned because the girl just looked like she didn't know what to make of this crazy English guy, and then he explained to her what I went, and she went, "Oh, that," whatever it was in Swedish. And I was so embarrassed at that point. Yeah. But I mean, stories like that happened all the time where, you would do something and you'd just be like, well, shouting doesn't doesn't make it any easier for someone to understand your English. And so one of the things that came out of that is that, my accent's completely messed up as it is. People don't know whether I'm American or English. And I always tell people I speak English with an American accent. So that's really confusing to people. But one thing that I have done, if anyone knows anybody who comes from the area of the UK where I come from, up in the northeast of England, my accent has little to do with that anymore. And yet, I can understand people from all over the world. Generally, if someone's on one of those crazy helplines and there's someone with a harsh accent or something, yeah, I get it. I can decipher it. But my own accent is so far away from what it used to be when I grew up. Quick story. So when I started at that first job and I was going to school, I rocked up into school, got on my books. The lecturers were going off. It was break time. I'm a kind of friendly kind of a person. So I wander over to start talking to people, and people are just like staring at me. And I'm like, well, this is kind of weird. So I wouldn't make any conversations with anybody. People just wouldn't, it's like I was literally talking a different language. So after about 3 months, and I got to have some friends within the organization and school, I was talking to one of these guys one day, and I'm like, what was with you guys? I rocked up, I'm the new face, blah, 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 trying to make some friends, whatever. And the guy's just like flat out, he's like, we couldn't understand a word you were saying.
That's hilarious.
And that's, the different, northeast to Chelmsford is like, 350 miles.
In a totally different accent.
A completely different accent.
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah. So that's, so now, I speak at a slower cadence, probably half the speed that most people would speak at from the area I come from in the UK.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, it probably works to get people thinking a little bit slower and understanding what you're saying.
Yeah, and that's the outcome, right? That's the positive outcome. So another quick story from one of my jobs along the way. I had and this guy was very influential on me. He told me a story once of he went to do a huge business meeting that he had with an Italian company, and it was like a breakthrough business meeting for him. So he's there, he rolls out, he does his presentation, 45 minutes, he gets to the end of the presentation. So, are there any questions? And it's just shaking the heads, no questions. So the person who hosted him, Italian guy, says, okay, so let's go have some lunch. So they're walking down the corridor from the meeting room, and my colleague said to this guy, so what did you think of my presentation? And he said, well, it sounded fantastic, but you were speaking so fast, I couldn't understand a word of it.
Oh, that's funny.
And that was his way of teaching was, you've got to slow down and make sure that people get it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
And probably no one would speak up and tell him to slow down a little
Yeah,
bit.
because they didn't want to insult the guy. And they didn't want to show that maybe they couldn't keep up with his English at, 40 words a minute or something, that he was rattling it out.
Oh, yeah. And all excited, too, I'm
Yes.
sure. He's
Yeah.
probably banging it away.
Yeah.
So we met in shooting quite a while ago, and maybe we'll do another podcast, even just like a part 2. But what was your introduction, and why did you get into shooting and long-range shooting? Where did this all start?
Yes, so I guess this started probably when I was about 12 or 13. This is another bad but comical story that you wouldn't get away with nowadays. So, I always preface things from 25 years ago with my family. I always say, well, 100 years ago, we used to do this. So 100 years ago, youngsters out there, cars used to have hubcaps that were made out of steel, and they were quite solid. So my next door neighbor, who's a couple of years older than me, had got himself for his birthday a BSA Air Sporter air rifle. And a BSA Air Sporter air rifle back in the early 80s, let's say, was like, it was like a pot of gold. So I'm over at his house, and we're plinking away in the back garden with this air rifle. And he's like, this is too boring. So we go upstairs into his room, and I lived in this nice neighborhood in Hartlepool, and every maybe 10 or 15 minutes a car would roll by, and he's like, "Here, watch this." So we start shooting at moving targets. So the point was that if you hit the hubcaps on the car, it would make a very solid hit sound. And so we did this for maybe half an hour or so until we got bored with it. And that's, that was my first introduction to rifle shooting.
Yeah, don't do that now.
Yeah.
Not a good idea.
Yeah, don't do this. Don't say Richard made me do it. It won't fly.
Oh, that's too funny. Well,
Yeah.
I think we all have probably stories. But still, I could see it. How old was your neighbor?
He was a couple of years older than me, so he
Yeah,
got
kids.
it. Eventually, he did something with that air rifle that got him in massive trouble with his parents. I mean, this is back in the day where the police officer would come around and smack you around the back of the head,
Right.
and that would kind of be the end of it. So carrying on, so from there, really didn't do any shooting at all, and then the time when I went to work for Marconi's, I was. It's kind of funny, but I was so poorly paid that one of my colleagues at Marconi Co. had joined the British Territorial Army. So the Territorial Army in the UK, it's a little bit like the National Guard is now, that you can actually get deployed and go places and get involved in conflict. In those days, we were kind of really just set up to, fight off the invasion from the east, if you like, if it ever happened. And so I joined the Royal Anglian Regiment, 5th Battalion, which is the Territorials as it was then. And so that got me into rifle shooting. And so, back in those days, we had a nice proper battle rifle that fired a 7.62 by 51, aka 308. And it was a proper battle rifle that probably weighed, 10 or 11 pounds. And as the new guy in an infantry platoon, of course, I was the guy that was handed the GPMG, the machine gun, right? 28-pound machine gun. And so that was a lot of fun, messing with the gas block so you could control the rate of fire, and shooting the GPMG was good. To be honest, I was never really that good at shooting the FN rifle. I mean, it was all open sights, and we would engage targets at ridiculous distances. In the British Army focuses on marksmanship. I think a lot like the Marine Corps does. A lot of focus on marksmanship, and so we would our annual shooting test or whatever would be challenging if you weren't a great rifle shot. And so there was one portion of it, I've told Jamie this story before, one portion of it where you have to shoot like left-handed with a gas mask on. And there was one fella in our platoon who was a really, really good shot. And I was always make sure that he was in the position next to me. And I'd be like, hey, put some rounds on my target, would you, so I pass?
There we go.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's always a way around it. But yeah, so that was back into, getting into rifle shooting. And I really, really enjoyed that. And Jamie's heard some of my other crazy stories about shooting machine guns and and stuff like that. There was a lot of fun. At the same time as that, I was getting more into shooting, and the company that I worked for, we actually had a pistol range on property.
Oh, that's awesome.
So they had their own pistol range, and a lot of it was, 2.2 style, target shooting. But there were a lot of guys there that were, firearms enthusiasts and, had decent collections and whatever. And so as people disappeared on a Friday night and had finished shooting their 50 rounds of 2.2 long rifle, people would come out with different interesting weapons and shoot them. And so at that time, I also got my firearms certificate, which is a big thing in the UK to go through that. I got a firearms certificate, and I had a Browning 9mm Browning high power that I used to shoot.
Oh,
as
nice.
well. Yeah.
Nice.
So, so that was that. And then I kind of sort of fell away from it and just got massively into rock climbing. I mean, just literally, we used to try and minimize the amount of weekends that we spent in the town that we lived in. It was a badge of honor to say, I haven't been here for a weekend in, 2 months, 3 months.
Get out and get after
Just get out literally get out of work as soon as you could on a Friday, and then meet up, and then go to North Wales, go to the Lake District, go to South Wales, go to Cornwall, go to the Peak District. I mean, there's all these fantastic places to go to in the UK that are specific areas, and they're all very different from one another. But the climbing culture, you just rock up somewhere, and next thing you know, you're stripping down to your underwear, putting your climbing gear on in the parking lot, and people are looking at you like, oh, there's those crazy climbing people again.
Oh, that's too funny.
And then go climbing for the day. And we would do that, weekend upon weekend upon weekend.
I think there's always, like, if you talk to anybody, there's a place in life where this is what you should be doing.
Oh, yeah.
This is that time and season in life where you get to do all the crazy stuff and maybe survive it.
Yeah, I mean, I was also into big motorcycles at the same time. So I was, riding, Honda Fireblades and GSXR 750s. And we literally would say, yeah, we're just going to ride at 100 miles an hour unless we're in a rush.
Yeah, that's when you really are convinced you're going to live forever and that you can't die.
Yeah, but, I can recount plenty of times where I've had super, super stupid close calls. I mean, I was sitting at the bottom of a rock face in Switzerland, a place called Crans, Montana. It's more famous for skiing than it is for rock climbing. And I'm sitting there putting my climbing shoes on because we're going to do rock climbing. And there's a whistle and a thud. And literally a piece of rock, half a house brick size, landed less than 2 feet away from me. And so I quickly put my helmet on.
Yeah. If you survive stupid long enough, you get these things.
Yeah.
When you came to America, what got you into, and we'll do a part 2 to this and just talk about like getting into the long range shooting part of it. Because when Richard retired, I did reach out to him about, hey, you interested in coming down and helping out because we got so much going on here and we got some things we're growing in. And he's just a great people person. Like, he knows how to talk to people, and he enjoys talking to people. Some people love what they do, but don't like talking to people, which doesn't really help any business at all. But just an introduction as to what got you back into shooting in the United States, and how hard was it being a non-U.S. citizen until that all worked into play?
Oh, so that's the last part of that question is the easy part, right? If you're here as a permanent resident, it's not a problem. You've passed the test of meeting, the ITAR requirements. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I mean, in my business world, we did everything from, I'll say, medical to missiles, and that'll cover it. Mm-hmm. So I was involved in all kinds of different business areas, if you like, including military in the U.S. So, in terms of, the biggest hurdle, of course, living in New Jersey, it's one of those places that's not so friendly to having firearms. And it's actually a place where, to get back into it, I was really just looking for a critter killer. I was trying to tame the critters in the backyard. Mm-hmm. So I went out and I'm like, okay, all I need is an air rifle. So guess what? An air rifle is a firearm in New Jersey.
Oh.
So there I had to go get what they call a firearms ID card. And I'm like, well, if I'm into this, then I may as well just, go buy something else that's more fun to shoot.
Get a real rifle.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and I don't know how this all rolled out, but basically I found an article that was written by a guy, and I was thinking about this as I was driving in this morning. I should have looked it up because, there's always influential things. It was an article about, long distance shooting. And I was just like intrigued because, up until that point, we shot at targets at 600-700 yards in the military.
Was it Zach from Demigod LLC?
It was Zach, is it Smith?
I think so. He's actually co-owner of Thunder Beast Arms now?
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. So I think it was an article by Zach, and it was just like, oh my goodness, this just looks like the most fun ever. I mean, to someone with a technical mind, you're trying to compute all the variables and get them all lined up. Mm-hmm. And then you've also got the physical variable of, getting outside and hiking around with a rifle and then making the perfect shot, which we're all trying to do all the time. And it just like struck a chord. I'm like, oh, I've just got to do this.
Yeah, it's funny you bring him up because we had him on for an interview a while back just with Thunder Beast Arms. He's a great guy and has really done great in our industry, but he actually introduced a lot of people to long-range shooting through some of his articles.
Yeah, I mean, we all read things and we just ho-hum.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's well-written. Sometimes not. It's well-written, and then you get something just like, wow, that's not just interesting. That I've got to go do that.
Yeah.
One of my friends, for instance, just started his journey, I'll say, into being a glider pilot.
Oh, no, that's cool.
And, I've also toyed, I still fly model airplanes. I fly model gliders because it's the purest form. And so years and years ago, we were going to the West Coast for a meeting with Cisco. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to go on, pay for flight thing with the glider. So I rock up at this place and sign up, pay my $175 or whatever. And so I'm walking out to the glider with the instructor, not the instructor, but whoever it was. I'll call him the instructor. And I'm like, hey, is there any chance I'll be able to get some stick time? And he's like, well, yeah, I mean, are you a pilot? I'm like, well, yes and no. I'm like, I fly, the big 12-foot model gliders. He goes, oh, you'll be fantastic at this. So we get up at, 2,000 feet or whatever and, pull the release off the tow plane. And he's like, okay, you got it. And I'd never flown before. And I literally flew the plane for the full hour, brought us in on the landing approach. And we were 25 feet off the ground, air brakes in play. And he goes, I actually have to land this. And I was in the zone. I mean, I was like, if he hadn't been there, I still say I would have walked away from that airplane. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. But what a fantastic experience!
I'm just going to keep going here because it's amazing for me this year. We had schools or classes for the long range shooting school where more than half the people attending the class were private pilots, commercial pilots, military pilots. It's like, I don't know what it is about things that either risk our lives, go boom, go fast, or go really high. But a lot of people that love flying get into shooting it. I don't know. There's something in that DNA, maybe, that learning something new, challenging yourself. But a lot of people that get into long-range shooting have that passion for flying as well. And by the way, glider pilot stuff, I would love to try it because there's so much you learn about the wind and thermals. And, I mean, those guys I think they're crazy, but they've got a skill set that keeps them alive with no motor. I find that to be crazy.
Yeah. So it's kind of fun, I mean, I was flying the big planes at limit of eyesight, and the instructor was like, heck, if you can control a plane well at 2,000 feet away from it, you've got no problem when you're actually sitting in the plane and you can feel what's going on. And he was very much correct. And so then the technical side of it, you've got to decide if you're going to jump into it. And I've always kept away from it because I'm like, you buy a new rifle, it's, by the time you get it all together, it's maybe $6,000 or whatever. Once you get into flying gliders, you'll be into it, and it'll be $160,000. Yeah. So I've kind of kept away from it because of that.
And I just pulled up those articles if you want to read it. And I'm going to go back to the article here real quick because I bet you the reason Richard really fell in love with that is because I think one of the first rifles and one of the first articles was an Ackerson International chassis custom painted.
Guilty as charged.
It's a cool. It got me into. Well, actually, one of my friends sent me one. So, if you're interested in reading some really good articles about long range shooting, it's still up. I just pulled it up. It's called demigodllc.com. It's demigodllc.com. They have nothing to do with us here. I'm just sharing it. If you love long range shooting, you want to read some really cool articles. Some of them are older, but legitimate today. I mean, if you go in there and read some of those articles about calibers, long range shooting calibers, this is what started him and his path for business as well. So, and his name is Zach Smith. You had it right.
Yeah,
it's been a long time since I've actually read that or been on that website. So, yeah, get a chance to stop over. Now, onto your path for long range shooting. So you got hooked into long range shooting. And where was your first attempt to try it? Like, what was your introduction to it?
Let's see. How did I do this? I bought, what did I buy? I think I bought, actually, I was just lamenting to you about this yesterday. I bought that Savage FP10, which was a great rifle. I bought a used 308 Savage FP10. It was a great shooting rifle. It was already in a Macmillan stock, bedded into a Macmillan stock. It shot great. And then I started going to a club in New Jersey, Cherry Ridge, and they had a pseudo tactical match that they put on, which was pretty good. From there, I met the guy that pretty much used to win the match most of the time. I got talking to him. And so he sort of guided me into, hey, if you're going to start with a Remington 700, this is kind of what you got to do. And so I bought a Remington 700 5R stainless and then literally got it in, packaged it up, sent it off to Graytan in Colorado. So Greg Tennell blew over it and put a Krieger barrel on it for me. And that rifle is still the rifle I'm shooting today. Although, Jamie, you've put a 243 barrel on it for me. It's actually on its third barrel now. I still have the 308 barrel, by the way, but it's on 243, and that's still a great shooting rifle. And so, I did the TAC match at Cherry Ridge. I won that once or twice. And then I started looking further afield, and that's really where I ran into you. At that time, there were various matches going on around the area, so we would go to Reed Range. There was the Lewistown Range had matches, still does, I believe, and then further afield, right? So we went to Allegheny Sniper Challenge. We did a match down south, I remember going to, and stuff like that. That's really what got me hooked into it. But to me, the field shooting side of it was just the way forward. I mean, just so many variables to handle. That's what really got me hooked.
Yeah, and I think just to put a time on this, we probably met in, I'm thinking the year. What do you think the year was? Because I think we met at Reed, actually.
Yeah, I noticed you were doing really, really well, and I wanted to, come stroke your arms and see if some of that shooting skill would rub off on me. I'm not sure it ever really did.
I think he's hyping that up a little bit.
Well, no, there is the famous Sniper's Hide incident.
Oh, yeah.
Jamie shot alternate relay from me at one of the Reed matches, and I posted his 1,000-yard group. It was like a rapid-fire 1,000-yard group, and I basically covered it with my hand, and people didn't react too well to that.
Yeah, I mean, it was Richard came up to he posted the picture up, and somebody had chimed in, about bench rest and all this other stuff, and how it was like a cherry-picked group or whatever. The thread went on forever, just criticizing the group. But then Richard chimed in and sort of said about the match scenario.
Yeah, it's in a match, laying in the dirt, shooting in the wind. Yeah, you've always been good at shooting in the wind. I've always been envious of that. So another story from ASC, there was a whole group of us there back in the days when ASC was milling and all that good old stuff. And we were lined up to address this target at 1,240 yards, I'll say, 1,250, something like that, 1,210, 1,250. And we're all shooting 308s. I think most of us were shooting 308s. Jamie's there with his 223 and literally 25 miles an hour wind. And unfortunately for the rest of us, Jamie was the only one that hit it.
Luckily.
How embarrassing is that?
I got really lucky on it.
No, don't say that. We always say at the school, when you do something that looks like it shows a lot of skill, you just sort of brush your shirt with your fingertips and say,
Blowing your knuckles a little bit.
I've got it. I've got it.
Yeah, some proud moments. There's a lot of fun shooting. And back then, the matches, too, I think, when you talk about the current PRS, and that's the big thing now, is I think a lot of people knew, because this has been going on 20 years, a lot of people knew, don't get the field event type thing that we're talking about. I mean, it's out there. Maybe NRL would be a closer example.
Yeah, I'd like to have, I haven't done one of those, but if I had to take a choice, if I had to pick a match I was going to do next year between a PRS match and an NRL, to me, it would be NRL. I'm not the guy. In fact, actually, I'll tell you a story. Mm-hmm. There was a match that I went to where it was part precision rifle, part pistol, and part carbine. And I got on the carbine stage, and I have a carbine. Everyone has a carbine, right? But I had trouble shooting that fast because I never do it. I never shoot fast. Mm-hmm. So even when I practice, I'm very deliberate. I just don't shoot fast. So I'm kind of missing that, right? We used to get pushed into that, the practical tactical matches from 10, 15 years ago. I'm kind of missing it, but I just don't do it at all. So that's something, if I have to go to, I should say when, not if, when I go to an NRL match, I'll have to do some practice.
Yeah, I think they're getting closer to the Eastern Seaboard. So, I mean, me personally, I'd love to. I know that I haven't shot a PRS match yet. We've been really busy the last 5 years and everything in our business, so not even really a hunting trip, which is sort of a shame. Still shoot, but I certainly am not at that level. But the PRS is more like of a stagnant firing line or positions, and you're learning to shoot off with different obstacles like barricades, and it's not a bad thing. It's certainly a skill set. They've gone ultra heavy with rifles, super low recoiling calibers, hit indicators on targets. So it's very fast and a lot of shooting in a day. And I would think that would be a lot of fun as well. But a lot of the older matches were different positions, challenging positions that you legitimately would see in the field, sometimes time, sometimes rapid fire, sometimes movers, stuff like that. But they had an application part of it that you actually might use on a hunting trip, or if you were law enforcement or anything like that these are real world scenarios that would play out, which was a lot of fun. So I think the NRL's maybe more similar to the field sniper matches.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's missing some of those pieces that we used to do way back when, right? So, some precision under stress. So the 100-yard, under stress, like we like doing the 21 dot drill.
Yeah.
I mean, that's still probably my favorite target that if I always give people a target, I'm like, here, try this one. If you can get all 21, you're doing pretty darn good there, son. You know? And so I love that side of things. But, the old ASC, rocking up on the hillside and, hey, do you see your target? Oh, it's that little thing down there. Yeah, okay. You got to mill it, and you got to figure the angle out, and you got to shoot it and figure the wind.
Yeah, it's all of it. There's so much math involved to sometimes make your head spin.
Yeah, and that was back in the day before Fordov. Thank you. Thank you, Hornaday.
Yeah. Oh, my God. Yeah, so think about like where we're at now with people still trying to chew their dope, with all the technology we have. Back then, you actually had to go out and just figure it out.
Yeah, you go out and shoot it.
Yeah, you shot it. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It was a lot of fun. Those were some really, really awesome times. 308, everybody started with it that I can remember at our age.
Let me tell you a story about that, 308. So to help me afford my 308, I bought the rifle. I bought 300 or 400 Lapua cases and 2 boxes of 168 SMKs and powder to go with it. And I figured that by the time I'd shot all those rounds through the gun, I'd basically paid for the gun.
Oh, with the reloads.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
And that was my, I can't help it, right? I'm sort of a bit of a math-driven kind of a person. And I was just like, how do I justify this to myself?
You have to, right? Oh, we find a way to justify. My wife says I'm really good at that when I'm working on something. So what we're doing now, and we'll break this into another part. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about the field shooting part. What calibers are you into now?
Well, this is an interesting one because I've since I moved away from 308, I went to 243. Mm-hmm. But I hate to say it, Jamie, I really do like that 6mm Creedmoor. Mm-hmm. And I shot one of Jamie's rifles the other week in 6mm Creedmoor, And unfortunately, I had to take the rifle apart again. But I kept the chamber and the barrel together, and I marked it up with Sharpie all down the barrel that this is a hammer. Because straight out of the gate, I literally zeroed the rifle in 3 rounds and then took it straight out to 600 yards.
And hammering away.
And it was like, I shot a group on the 600-yard target that I'm kind of proud of.
With
Jamie,
factory ammo.
With factory ammo. And Jamie's like, I came in and I'm like, Jamie, this thing's so good. He's like, well, he goes, it's for sale if you like, with a nod. I'm like,
Yes.
So 243. I guess I'm into 6mm. You know, I like 6mm. It can be challenging to see your hits at longer distance, but you know, I honestly, you know, I'm willing to not see a splash. It's my fault for missing, right?
Yeah, so back in 20 years ago even, there wasn't hit indicators. In a lot of the matches, you had to hit the steel and make it ring enough or move enough for the person spotting it to give you the points.
Right.
Where now you've got hit indicators on the targets, which make that a lot easier in self-spotting. So one of the reasons why I never went 6mm was at the longer shots, sometimes if you missed, you just didn't get a big enough splash. So what Richard's talking about is sometimes you sacrificed that little bit of splash or seeing what was going on. But you had way faster follow-up, way easier,
right.
You know, less recoil.
Yep.
There's a lot of benefits to it.
Yeah, I mean, 243 is, I always just refer to it as old school, right? It's an old cartridge design. Obviously, at the school here, a lot of 6.5 Creedmoor, which is a sweet shooting caliber. Similar recoil, I'd say, you know, not terrible. But I still like my 243. It's still a winner. So I have, you know, I've been shooting a little bit of AR, not too much. My local range to me is only 200 yards. So in that respect, I tend to do, you know, wackadoodle stuff. So I'll rock up to the range and I'll grab my carbine and I'll put a shoot and see targets. They're probably like, what are they, 7 inches? I'll put one of those dots out at 200 yards and I'll shoot sitting position with the carbine at 200 yards because that's a good way to challenge yourself and do something that's really hard. I mean, I can come along with my precision rifle and, you know, pound away at 200 yards, but there's a point where all you're doing is burning barrel, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so, just wasting a lot of ammo or sending it down range.
Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff I do. And then back end of the summer, I started getting into a little bit more air rifle. I want to go shoot some of these field target competitions next year. There's a series that's up in Ohio I want to have a crack at. So I pulled out my HW97K air rifle, and I was trying to shoot that. And I just, you know, coming in the morning, talking to Jamie, lamenting on how hard it is to shoot a piston air rifle, you know, compared to shooting some of the other stuff that we shoot. I mean, you'll put, you know, 2 or 3 rounds into a nice hole at 25 yards, and then the next one's 3/4 of an inch away. And you're like, I did nothing different.
Yeah.
So that's a fun challenge as well.
And in a future podcast here, before I forget, I just want to throw it out there. We're going to bring back up the AR barrel and a shocking moment. So maybe next week's podcast, we're going to talk about when you buy barrels, even not mentioning any brands, which really high-end brands, but we bore scoped one out that wasn't shooting well that he'd brought in from home, and he purchased a new one of even a better brand, and we'll save it for another podcast.
Yeah, I was like,
and then
later.
Also, we're going to bring up betting in the next podcast. We actually have a video that we filmed we're going to put out on Friday,
right.
But we want to do some mathematical stuff on it to talk about what little contact.
Yep.
Because Rich is going to be helping out with the podcast now. I know he didn't know he volunteered for it, but you know, we were amazed, and I'm always amazed. Like, and now Richard's here, I just like sharing all the stuff with him and showing him, and it's someone to complain to about. Look at this, you know. And, but then also we talked a little bit about. And just to give you an idea with some future podcasts about PCP air rifles and 22s and the value of them as trainers now and the quality that they've gotten up to. And we actually were working trying to get a couple PCP rifles here for trainers for one of our ranges here. So that might be a whole nother podcast just to bring, because I think there's a connection there. There's a value to it for a shooter.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, shooting, right? There's skill sets along the different... I'll say games, right? The different types of competition. The field target is, I think I actually went to a field target area in Chelmsford when I lived in the UK, probably 35 years ago. A friend of mine said, hey, there's a shooting club nearby. It was when I had my Browning. And I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool. I'll come along. He loaned me an air rifle. And we went, and I was shooting at these little squirrels, and you'd hit the center point of the target and the target would fall over. And I think that was the early part of what then became Field Target for air rifles. So the challenge there is that, depending on what class you're in, sometimes you're allowed to touch the zoom on your scope, and sometimes you're not. So there's there's different classes, the PCP class and the Springer class, and like everything else, right? There's little pieces of it that make it harder or easier depending on how you look at it.
Oh, there is. And we have an access to a range where it's a field challenge course that would surprise the customer or the shooter. They wouldn't know what they're walking around the corner into, and then make them figure out the shot, out to 200-300 yards maybe. And we don't want them to do it with high-powered rifles. And the idea was, well, we can maybe set up a movers thing with air rifles or 22s.
Yeah, it'd be perfect.
Shooting slung and all these positional stuffs, but without cranking a 300 Win Mag round off over top of a target.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about air rifles. You don't really need a lot of room to get some shooting practice.
No,
and you can definitely practice your fundamentals.
Oh, and at distance, which is what shocked me the most, was they can actually get these things at distance as well. So a couple podcasts are going to come up in a series here. We're going to bring them up. I think the next one we're going to talk about actually is the bedding, because that's what we're working on right now.
We should definitely talk about that.
And then I'd love to go back to the AR barrel, because him bringing that up reminded me. And then we'll talk a little bit more about, as he progressed through shooting and some of the different things that he's found, some of the things he found with reloading. He does teach here at the shooting school, and it's been helping. And actually, the very first class we ever held more than 15 years ago, Richard was there helping.
Yep. Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was too many shooters on the line.
Yeah, 12, 15 shooters.
It was a little chaotic at times, but we got through it.
Yeah, that was a lot of. And then when he contacted and said that he moved back closer to Pennsylvania from New Jersey, and I was like, oh my God, he's really close. And then when we moved our shop to Somerset, I just had to reach out to him and say, hey, if you're ever bored and you want something to do, now that you're retired. So really honored and privileged to have him here and helping and, just working with our business too. So looking forward to having him, regularly on the podcast. Who's once would like to come on and join us.
Hey, if the people say they understand me, I'll be here.
We'll just have to keep them at a slower rate of conversation.
Yeah, well, I always say this, but even my wife, every once in a while, she just stops me and what did you just say?
And for the record, I say it here at the class, but the British have a way to insult you, and you don't know you're being insulted. I mean, they say it in such a kind way, and with the accent, it just covers up the insult. All right, well, Richard, thank you so much. We're gonna wrap this podcast up here, but we're gonna continue on to next week. We'll get into the bedding, and we're gonna have a video posted up about that. Any final words you want to add to the podcast?
No, thanks, Jamie. It's a lot of fun. I mean, we can sit under a tree and talk for hours, I think.
Oh, my God, yeah. Yeah.
And I think we have a road trip coming up as well.
We do.
Oh, my goodness. That's going to be a lot of yakking.
So the movers class.
Yes.
So if you're into shooting long range and you ever wanted to try your hand, I really think it's my favorite class to teach, but it's probably one of the more fun classes you'll ever take with your rifle, and we got maybe 4 or 5 slots open for it.
Yeah.
So,
Come join.
Yeah, so you want to learn more about it, just wolfprecision.net and log on to the Movers tab, and you can actually see a video we produced about 2 years ago of it. All right, before I do wrap the podcast up, I do have to say a quick thank you to MDT. MDT is a proud sponsor of the show, maker of great chassis. We build lots of rifles in them, everything from the new HNT 26, which is a fantastic carbon fiber hunting chassis, right up to the new ACC Elite and the new JAE 700 or J. Allen, which is going to be re-released here very soon. So we're looking forward to bringing those here and sharing them with you, because actually, besides the AI, I thought the J. Allen was probably one of the more comfortable chassis I personally have ever shot. Unfortunately, they went out of business, but MDT has taken it on to bring the chassis back on the market, so I'm excited to get one here, share it with customers. But if you want a great upgrade to your rifle, factory or otherwise, check out all the great chassis for all the different makes and models that they offer. If you're interested, stop over to mdttac.com, mdttac.com. All right, so thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the podcast. A little bit longer, but great. I mean, Richard said we could spend hours talking about this stuff, and we do all day long. But there's a lot of great conversation. I think what's going to happen is this is naturally going to morph over to us talking about, you're going to bring up a story about something, and we're like, wow, we got to talk more about that.
Oh, and I have stories.
Yeah, and it's I think that's where a lot of the podcast is going to lead to, about all the different things that that we've experienced over years, just going to bring it back to light and say, oh my God, we should talk about that. So really looking forward to having Richard on the podcast here. If you enjoy the podcast, please feel free to share it. If you're into long range shooting or you know somebody who is, it helps a lot with the podcast and our standings. Also, if you enjoy the podcast, if you leave us a great rating or a great review, that helps a long way with us being found in all the algorithms as well. And if you enjoy the podcast, you can also stop over to Patreon, look at Wolf Precision, and you can become a sponsor of the show if you like. We always really appreciate that support as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us here on the podcast. My name is Jamie Dotson. I'm your host, and you're listening to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.